Hello everyone. Today I want to show you a game from the 2017 Gibraltar Masters. Well, actually a position rather between Grandmaster David Howell and German Grandmaster who's about 18 years old, I think, Dmitry Kollars. Now here's the position after move 15. Uh, Rook to d8 by Collars, who has the black pieces. And in this position, we can say that white has the slightest of advantages when, we're assessing this position um, and trying to find out what our next steps should be. We have to look at the features in the position. The analytical method is what you're supposed to lean on when you are uh, exactly not sure what to do. You don't have any direct tactics or direct threats that you can, um, you know, uh, place on your opponent. And so in these type of positions where you don't really know what to do, it's not clear. This is when you have to sit on your hands, all right, and look at the general features in the position. And so here I look at this position and you know material is equal. Um, what else can we look at? King safety. Um, are there any direct threats? Remember, it's white to move. So the black threatening. To win the rook or something on the next move. So we don't see anything just obvious like that. One thing that stands out is open lines, right? You look at for open lines, a D file, right? It's the only open file, and black has possession of it with this rook. All right, but you know, and that's something we keep in the back of our minds. Of course, if we analyze it further, it's not that big of a deal because um, the file can be easily contested by white. He can play rook fd1 at any time, and it's not like the rook is threatening to penetrate anything like that. But anyway, it's just something to keep in mind that yes, there's an open D file. Um, and when we think of open lines, just don't think of ranks and files, but don't forget about the diagonals. So you do have the diagonals, for instance, A3 to F8. That you could look at C1 to H6. All right, so there's a few diagonals open. The light square diagonals are a bit shorter for the bishop on G2 and the bishop on F5, but nevertheless, there's some open diagonals. So all in all, I mean, yeah, there's an open file. It's the major transit point. There's along the D file, and there's a few open diagonals, but primarily the positions are mostly of a semi-closed nature. Are there any major pawn defects here? Not really, right? Both sides have two pawn islands, and there's no outstanding features like an isolated pawn or hanging pawns or something like that. All right. Weak squares in the position, not too many, but if you want to look for weak squares in black's position, I would look at this G5 square, right? G5, it's a nice square. What about C5? Okay, and in some cases even this square, but right now it's not like black or white can put a piece there immediately. Looking from the black perspective, this is a good square, right? Square D4, not for the rook, but maybe another piece. So this is just something that, also this square is just something to make mental notes of. Who has control of the center here? Well, you can see that the center is pretty much up for grabs. It's contested by both sides. Both sides have played well in the opening, both grandmasters, and you can see, for instance, D5, right? It's contested by both black and white. Nobody can really establish control there. White can't establish control over D4. Actually, it's black that has more control here. e4 because white cannot establish a piece on e4, but black can. So we have to give black the nod in the center. Okay, so those are little advantages that you know, features in a position that you put together. Okay, and then you look at development. There's really no, everybody's developed, and then finally at the development, who has a better piece location? Here, um, of course, I think White's rook is probably the best placed piece in the position. But one thing that we have to give White the slight edge here is, as far as piece location, is the position of his bishops and his knight. Notice how he's in a position where he's putting pressure on the queen side. For example, this pawn is attacked. If this rook wasn't there, then possibly this pawn could fall. Okay, it's hard to move this pawn because this bishop is bearing down. So as far as the economic placement of the pieces, we have to give white, the advantage there. So let's put all the features together, right? Putting everything together, I would say the position is equal, but giving white a slight edge. And the reason why I give white the slight edge is because of the last point I made, which is this pressure that he has on these queenside pawns, which of course has an effect on the way black can develop his pieces. Okay, just that alone gives white the slight nod there. Yes, black controls the d file, but again, like I said, it's easily contested by white. Anytime white wants to, he can just play a rook to d1, and for instance, if black tries to double, he can instantly play the rook to d1 and neutralize that threat. So with all those features in mind, what should white do here? Like how and oh, one thing I want to say too is once you assess the position, then it can it gives you um, the foundation whereby you can make a plan. Because first you have to be able to tell, do I have an advantage? And if I do have an advantage, how big of an advantage? So we have already discussed, yeah, white has a real slight advantage, right? Because once you understand what type of advantage you have, or if you have an advantage at all, or if you're worse, then you'll be able to understand how you should be playing. If you have a big advantage, then you should be looking for more, straightforward, direct, possible moves to even land a tactical shot or finish off the opponent or increase your advantage greatly, right? If you're worse, okay, if you're worse in the position, there's a certain way that you should be playing, okay? To not really, you're not playing to just knock your opponent out in one blow because you don't have the position. And if you have a slight advantage, the same way, there's not going to be these killer moves in the position that you could, so you shouldn't be looking for a mate if you're slightly better, you see? Um, or looking, to win opponent's queen or something if you're slightly better. It just means that you have to continue to build. And what are you building on? You're building on the advantages that you came up with in your general analysis. There's many ways to analyze. I'm just giving you a quick sample. So for instance, I'm looking at this position and I just pointed out white's major, not major because he has a small advantage, but I just pointed out white's small advantage, which is the pressure on the queen side. So that lets me know that I should continue my play in that area. Okay, that's where I'm strong at. All right, and I should, of course, my strategy, try to mitigate my weaknesses. Okay, so or keep an eye on them at least. And also, I want to maintain strength in the areas that I already have an advantage in. In other words, I don't want to lose my advantage in the center unless I'm getting trading it for an advantage somewhere else, because we already said that white has an advantage, for instance, on the e4 square. I'm sorry, black has an advantage on the e4 square, so black doesn't want to lose control over this e4 square unless he can gain an advantage somewhere else. Now white, right? White would like to gain control or diminish black's influence over that square, Okay, so that would be part of his strategy, is basically getting rid of his weaknesses and increasing in areas he's strong. Black, on the other hand, wants to neutralize White's strong point, which is his play on the queen side, and it goes on and on and on. For instance, one of the strategic elements in this position, White wants to neutralize Black's influence on the open file, on diagonals, etc. Another thing too to consider in this position that I didn't mention in the analysis is notice all the pawns from both sides, how many pawns occupy light squares. Okay, I think 5 pawns on each side both occupy light squares. Therefore, this lets you know that there's a general weakness in the position on dark squares in general. What does that mean? That means the dark square bishops are at a premium in this position. So, for instance, a good strategic element to keep in mind is for both sides that if they can eliminate the other's dark square bishop while retaining their own. So, for instance, if Black was able to trade his bishop with his knight, that would be good because then Black's dark square bishop would be able to dominate, and vice versa. Let's say if this knight was able to trade for this bishop, then White's dark squared bishop would dominate. So those are all strategic elements that you would like to keep in mind. So now that we have our foundation set, let's continue with move 16. David Howell played knight c5. And now that I've laid the foundation, all the moves should make sense. Right? He's probing on the queen side. Of course, he would like to provoke move like b6 or something like that. But Kollars is a grandmaster, so he's trying to avoid weakness. Rook a b8. Notice though, with the move going to, with the rook going to b8, this pawn is vulnerable. Guess what happens next? Rook fd1. Remember, it's all a part of the analysis, right? Now he's just contesting the D file. Remember, I was saying how this is a strong point for Black, weak for White. So White is just simply mitigating his weakness. And now it has also comes with the threat of rook takes d8. Then when this rook comes over, then the knight can grab the pawn. This forces Black to relinquish his control over the D file. Now that box can be checked in White's favor. Bishop f8. So trying to get the bishop, trying to get the bishop out. And remember what I said is strategically, Black doesn't want to get rid of this bishop for this knight. Okay, but the bishop is sitting bad here. So what else to do? He tries to bring it into the game. Knight a4 from Howell. Remember what I said about this pawn. Now that's under attack. Rook a8. Knight c5. Who knows? Perhaps they were trying to make time control, or who knows? But he's just making some provocative moves in the position. So rook b8. Now rook d2. This is kind of like a waiting move here. Now it's not the best waiting move, but it's kind of a waiting move because he's trying to get Black to weaken himself, right? Because even though White has a slight advantage, that's all it is a slight advantage. So he's trying to get some more concessions out of Black. Here, Kollars just plays bishop e7. So Dmitry Kollars plays bishop e7. Again, it's kind of a waiting move. I like to use the tennis analogy, just volleying back and forth, not doing a move that is going to destroy your position like a lot of weaker players would do, because its tendency to want to do something, to want to be active. But like Steiner's rule is you really can't do any more than what the position gives you. I think a lot of players have trouble understanding that. You can't checkmate on every move or win the queen or rook. You have to play within the parameters of what you have or risk losing. An interesting though, and this is why I criticize Rook D2 just a bit, is Black has this opportunity to play Bishop takes H3 here, which is double edged, and I think it's difficult for White, excuse me, for Black to play here. So Bishop takes H3, and I think I would have avoided this too as Black, but it's interesting this to point out. So Bishop takes H3, and the idea is Bishop takes H3, and then there's a fork on E4. So Bishop takes C5, Bishop takes C5, and now knight E4, forking the rook and the bishop, and then let's say Bishop B4 and knight D2 and Bishop D2, and now you have the two bishops versus the rook, which is very interesting. And it's hard to say who this favors. I would say it favors the in this position the two bishops. Remember what I said too about the general weakness of the dark squares, and now you just had a dominant dark square bishop going around. So, but this is an interesting position here, and I wanted to point that out. However, instead of capturing here, just playing Bishop takes H3, which probably is good, White can also damage the Black pawn structure with after this pseudo sacrifice knight A6. B takes A6. Now Bishop takes H3. C5. Bishop G2, and so on. And you can see the pawn structure of the Black queen side is not too good. So Bishop E7, keeping things calm, if not a bit passive. The problem here for Black again is that White has a slight advantage, and Black really has no prospects. So White is only playing for two results, either win or draw. So it's very comfortable, and he can continue to build his position here. I played in the game against Irina Krush, where I had the Black pieces, and I was in a similar position from a totally different opening, but a similar position from the standpoint that the position was equal, but I had no real prospects. So she was able to just keep pressing and pressing and trying things and pressing and pressing and pressing, and eventually I wound up losing the game. So solid but passive positions are very very dangerous and should be avoided. This is why I mentioned this move, Bishop takes H3, because yes, it does shake things up a little bit, but at least Black is not as passive. Here, White can kind of just just probe around and try to get concessions out of Black. Knight D3 now, attacking the E pawn. All right. Now, how do you defend that pawn? You could play Bishop D3, but it's another slight concession in the bishop here, right? If you play Bishop D3. Also, now this knight is really the only guardian of E7. So strategically, Black just doesn't want to give up the bishop piece, but therefore the only other option is to push E4. And now this pawn is in direct line of this powerful bishop on G2. So this ties down the knight on F6 and the bishop on F5 to the defense of this pawn. Howell drops back to E1. Now he could have went back to C5 also, and just putting some more pressure back immediately on the e pawn, and then let's say after b6, knight a6, and rook c8, bishop f4, and white just has a lot of pressure on the position. Black is walking on eggshells here. Has to be very careful. Is he lost? No, but he's just in this, this position where he just has to be, extremely careful and agile with his movements. So knight e1 instead by Howell. This knight is going to go to c2, a6. Of course, I didn't mention that this pawn was attacked, but a6. Again, provocative moves, just causing black just to slowly, basically destroy his own position. Knight c2. And now to prevent the knight from coming here, c5 is played. Okay. And bishop g5. Now b5. And of course, white should not take. You just play knight e3. And now if black takes, his position becomes worse. So knight e3, threatening to take here, ruin the black pawn structure, but also prepare to capture with the knight on c4. So bishop e6, putting more pressure because, after all, black would love for white to play this move, which would, improve black's position tremendously. Rook c2. The idea is just to keep everything intact after an exchange on c4. King g7. And here's one of those waiting moves again, h4. Gaining space on the king side, but also just protecting the bishop on g5 in case of there's any funny stuff, knight moves or anything, discoveries, etc. The bishop on g5 is secure. Here, as a result of all the pressure, black starts to unravel. Plays b takes c4. Did he have to do that? No, but just being passive for so long has a psychological effect on many players. Maybe he could have tried to hold on with, maybe just king f8, right? But he couldn't wait, so he played b takes c4, knight takes c4. Now look at the pawns, right? That should need little comment right there. The white pawns are now much better. Remember when we did our analysis earlier, we figured the pawn structure was pretty much equal, but now white has a distinct advantage with the pawn structure because now white has only 2 pawn islands and now black has 3. Right, 2 isolated pawns on the queen side, and the e pawn might as well be isolated. Okay, now simple move like bishop takes f6, followed by bishop takes e4, just wins the pawn. All right. Rook b4. And again, trying to destroy white's pawn structure also. Say after bishop takes, for example, but just doesn't have, black just doesn't have time. Bishop d2. Rook b8. And now bishop g5 again with this same threat of bishop takes here and then winning this pawn. Black decides not to repeat and plays rook d8. Now, if black does repeat, of course, Howell is not going to, take a draw. But a good alternative here is just knight d2. Knight d2 can, I'm sorry, not knight d2, knight b2. Knight b2 can be played. And also, bishop f4, for example. So, let's say bishop f4, b takes, rook, B takes C4. Notice how this pawn is fixed here. And these weak pawns make it very hard for black to hold on in this position. So for instance, king f8, uh, bishop g5 is an easy move to do, but then you have to be careful of going into this opposite color bishop ending. Play moves like bishop h3 with the idea of bringing the bishop to c8. And the basic premise is that you have the two bishops positions opened up, isolated pawns, and it's going to be very difficult for black to defend himself in those positions. So black decides not to repeat and plays rook d8. And again, him coming to the open d file is not really that serious for white, because white's advantage has grown to the extent to where he could allow the rook to come to d1, and that's not really going to change the evaluation of the position, which is that white is just better at this point. Even now, he could just simply play bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and bishop takes e4. Okay, but again, you have to be careful with these endings with these opposite color bishops. And then you have this kind of situation where even though you're up a pawn, black might still be able to draw here. Even if white took with the rook instead, then the rook comes down to d2. Alright, so you have to be careful. This is why Howell didn't just go after the pawn right away. Instead, he decides to place more pressure on the position, knight d2. Bishop f5. Of course, you can't allow the okie doke with move like that, discover the attack on the rook. So e3, fixing the weakness. a5, and now Howell plays bishop takes f6, king takes f6, because if bishop takes f6, then the c pawn is just hanging also. Okay, but before the c pawn is grabbed, you will play knight takes e4 first. So this is why he takes with the king. Knight takes e4 check, bishop takes, and now black is just praying for that opposite color bishop ending to work out, but he just has too many weaknesses here. King e5, bishop f3, rook comes to b8, bishop e2, f5. Now the rook takes over the open file, avoiding the exchange of rooks. Remember what I said about that opposite color bishop ending. King f1, king f6, bishop d3, g5. Again, what to say about this? This is just kind of bad endgame technique right here, because all black's doing really is creating more weaknesses. Yes, he's trying to exchange the pawns, but he should try to limit the creation of new weaknesses. Maybe play moves like rook b4 or something like that. Rook a8. Just this creates a new weakness, because now look at the pawns. Now you have four separate pawn. Four isolated pawns. King e2. Now he plays rook b4. Rook c1. And again, with this new weakness created, white is simply just going to move the rook to the h file. Rook g4. And now here, this creates serious problems for black after f4. Okay, so f4 check, king f6, and now simply rook h1 exclam. Not even worried about the pawn on g3. Rook takes G3, and not um, Rook takes H5. This is winning also, right? But this is a credit to Howell's technique. Rook takes H5 is winning also, but then Black has to deal with this counterplay. Rook G2, King F3, Rook takes A2, followed by Rook takes F5. Like I said, White is still winning, but why give the extra counterplay? Instead, after Rook takes G3, Howell just simply play King F2. This forces the Rook to get out of the area, and then Rook takes H5 is happening, and then followed up with Rook takes F5. Notice this possibility is all created by this move G5, which is unnecessary. Okay, so there was a great deal in that analysis of that ending, and I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that it came across as clear as it was to me. But these type of positions are very important to study in chess. Yes, tactics are important, and it should be a given that you have to be strong tactically, but most of the times it's these type of positions where a lot of people are weak in. I don't really know how, like, what to do when you get in a position where it's like no specific thing to attack, or to win material or something like that. Now what do you do? And this is where planning is important. This is where assessment of the position and understanding who's better and formulating a plan is very important. And so you saw the logical um, plan from the assessment of the position here to developing the plan of sticking to um, attacking the black weakness on the queen side, right? And just to the and as the game went on, we saw white just increase, not really increase the pressure so much, but just keep giving black opportunities, giving him more rope to hang himself. Make it solid moves. Understanding there was no need to rush in the position, and then eventually, black, um, collapsed, and especially at the end with this move, G5, just accelerating the defeat, even faster. So that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, and I will see you soon on the next one.